Hey, so don't hate me for a moment. This isn't my video footage, and I'll link this in the description as just in the Creative Commons for Minecraft, but I figured you'd probably want to see Minecraft while I talk about Minecraft instead of seeing my beautiful face. So I want to talk for a few minutes about an idea that I've had for Minecraft, specifically for 1.19, since before it was released. Really, before we even kind of had a lot of information about the Warden. The first few things that we knew about the Warden is that it was going to deal a lot of damage. It was basically like a boss, but it was blind, and it was going to have some way to prevent the player from cheesing it. And I thought that was all really cool stuff, right? Obviously, you know, Mojang is trying to prevent us from even like killing the Warden. Like, they're trying to incentivize us to play this new structure, stealth mode, and I love that idea. However, in execution, I don't like it. So the main reason is that when you find an ancient city, it basically plays the same way every time. I mean, you've got like 3 different modes of trying to traverse an ancient city, right? You can wait till the end game and try to kind of tank it with your godly gear or whatever. That's fine. That's cool. I'm happy with rewarding the player for in-game exploration. That's fine. And then, of course, you've got, you know, stealth mode, which is clearly what Mojang was really going for with the design of the structure itself. And I like that, too. There's nothing really like that in the game. There are a couple things where you kind of get hints of stealth, but more often than not, just because you're not quite ready for those types of structures. So to have a structure that's built around it from its inception is a really cool concept. But third, and probably the most obvious and the easiest to cheese, in my opinion, is just brute force. The Warden takes so long to get out of the ground that, like, by the time you wake it up, you just take off, you just run, and you're out of there more often than not. Wardens don't provide a huge challenge in themselves because of that. I don't mind that either, by the way. I think that that's perfectly fine. You shouldn't be forced to interact with the Warden or forced to be stealthy because you accidentally woke it, or maybe something else did. You know, that would suck. So all of these are fine things. I just wish there was more, for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, the ancient cities kind of play the same each time you find them, in part because there's only one type of ancient city. Like, yeah, sometimes the little rooms or whatever get moved around. Okay, cool, that's fine. But it's not enough to really vary it much, right? So, first, I would introduce 2 new ancient city types. I'll talk about those at the end of the video if I remember to, but that's not actually the important thing I want to talk about. Rather, I want to talk about a couple of new mob ideas that I had. And I thought both of these really had a lot of synergy, not only with themselves, but with the ancient city as it stands. One of these mobs is neutral, and I'll talk about that one in a moment. And then one of these mobs is technically hostile, but it doesn't really deal damage to you, at least not initially. That mob is called the Gobbler. It's a small mob, it is a blind mob, and is attracted to the player based not only on sound, but also based on the player's level. The higher level you are, the more attracted to you it is, or the longer it pursues you. And the reason for this is because this mob actually consumes levels, at least for a minute, right? It holds on to them so you don't lose them forever, sure. And obviously if you kill the mob, like, your experience or whatever can go down into the skulk blocks, fine, whatever. Or maybe you get them back automatically. It doesn't really matter to me. The nitty-gritty details aren't important, but what I think is really cool about this is that, since it takes your levels, it's essentially a mob XP store. And that's a really cool idea if you can tame it. So why not make it tameable, right? If you have to go to the ancient city to get one of these, and you have to go to the ancient city to get, like, I don't know, echo shards or something, maybe use echo shards to tame them or something, you know, whatever. But on top of that, I think it also plays nicely with the next mob that I'm going to introduce, which is the Zealot. The Zealot is actually a type of illager, but it is a neutral illager type, and it's only found in ancient cities. In fact, it can only exist in ancient cities. If you try to remove it, it will die after a short period of time. But as a neutral mob, you can trade with it, and I really like this idea. However, it doesn't behave like villagers or piglins. It has a UI that opens up. It's kind of a hybrid of a UI between, like, villagers and an enchantment table. But rather than taking emeralds or taking gold like piglins do, no, it takes enchanted gear. And I love this idea so much for a handful of reasons. First off, I see the ancient cities mostly as sort of in-game content. You don't have to go there in-game, but you're clearly incentivized to do so, at least in part because of the strength of the Warden, right? You want to be able to survive if you make any mistakes. And what's something else you have at the end of the game? Like, a lot of enchanted gear if you're like me, right? In cities are stacked with them, the trial chamber, so much more. Enchanted books, enchanted gear, you have villagers upon villagers, and I just love the idea of trading away some of that stuff when you have so much of it. Sure, you can grind the levels off, but you would only really do that if you have good gear already, right? And at that point, what use is the XP that grinding is going to get you? So the idea here is that by trading the XP, or trading the enchantments in this case, you can basically influence the items that the Illager, that the Zealot is going to give you, right? Now, there's no guarantee it's going to give you exclusive items or good items. And in fact, there are a couple of ways you can actually improve your odds. One thing you can do is just, bring really good enchanted gear. The better the gear is, the better the enchantment, the higher tier it is. Like netherite's going to do better than leather, higher durability better than lower durability. Obviously, better enchantments are going to do better than like curses, etc. Then the better chance you have of the Zealot offering you better gear. And I said offer on purpose because they're not going to offer you just one thing. No, for every piece of gear you give them, they're going to offer you between like 1 and 3 items, right? Again, if it's low tier gear, maybe they only offer you 1, and it's not always a high chance that it's a good item, but maybe you get lucky. However, as I mentioned, the Zealot is, well, a neutral mob, meaning you can make it aggressive. And as a type of Illager, it is also most closely related to the Invoker. It actually has some similar attacks to the Invoker. A couple. First off, what are its attacks? Well, if you were to attack it, then suddenly it is now hostile towards you, and it can do a few different attacks. No, it is not going to do the little ground chomper thing, whatever that's called. Cool. Instead, it's going to shoot what I just call like a soul fireball or a soul charge. It's just a fireball, but soul fire, right? And I figure that soul fire could have a few different properties to what it already has in the game. Obviously, it damages you faster than fire, but I think it'd be cool too if like it went through fire protection. That's a neat idea instead of nerfing fire protection like they did. But also, some of the other moves that it can do is it can summon 2 more mobs, the Witch and the Vex. This is terrifying for a couple of reasons. Okay. So one of the things that Mojang had hinted at when making the Warden was that you weren't going to be able to easily cheese it, in part because if you tried to tower up or build your way into a wall or whatever, it was just going to be able to like get at you, right? Obviously, the way that this was accomplished was via a sonic like blast type attack, which is cool. I like that. I think that's fine to allow the Warden to have that attack. But I think to make it even better than this, if you also had Vexes, right? Vexes can go through walls. They can knock you back. They deal a pretty substantial amount of damage too. And they can follow you around for long distances making noise, which the Warden can track. That is a terrifying combination. But then also on top of both of these things, the Witches, right? Witches are obviously less dangerous than Vexes most of the time. Like, yeah, they could inflict you with some status effects, and that's kind of cool. But also, Witches follow you, and they throw potions at you, things that the Warden could also track. So if you made it where the Warden maybe didn't track things that were summoned by the Zealots, maybe didn't track the Zealot themselves, and maybe didn't track or didn't really care that much about the Gobbler mobs, then the ancient cities get to be absolutely terrifying, in all honesty. But still, remember, if you play this stealthy, as I've suggested, then it doesn't change, right? Since the Gobblers come after you based on your sound, if you're already playing the ancient city stealthy, then you've got nothing to worry about. If the Zealots aren't hostile to you unless you attack them, just don't attack them. Pretty simple stuff. The ancient city basically plays the same way. You could ignore them completely, right? And to make the Zealots just a little bit more terrifying, they have an inventory and they keep track of all the items that you give them, and then they will equip the best gear that you offer them. So if you give them like a sword, for example, then they might revert to a melee style of attack. And that's horrifying also, right? So overall, I really like all of these types of attacks, types of interactions in general. But lastly, before I end the video, as I mentioned, the ancient cities need more building types, right? Instead of the one that we currently have, which I call the Sprawl, it's a very large but relatively flat city as it stands, very easy to navigate with an elytra and not much else. You would have 2 more types. One that I call Tiers. Tiers is just like a 3-layered ancient city. It'd be a little bit smaller, but it'd be obviously taller. And then you also have the Maze. And that one's probably the most fun, in my opinion. We just don't really have anything maze-like in Minecraft currently, I guess outside of like, the potato update. And so to have like an actual conventional maze where like wardens are maybe less prevalent, maybe there's less common in this, but they're still there, can follow you around like little minotaurs. That's such a cool little nod to, well, not only fiction, but also just general like gameplay, in my opinion anyway. And it obviously gives you some choices, right? Because if you want to go after, one type, or maybe you get skilled at one type of ancient city, clearly that's the one you want to find most. But if there are other types that you're better at, you have choices. And now, when you find more than one, you might have a little more incentive to play through it because, well, it's the one you wanted to see. I don't know. It's just a little more interesting than the last one you found. Because at the end of the day, Ancient Cities basically play the same. You've played one. You've played them all. There's not that much else exciting about them. And, yeah, that's basically it, I guess. So let me know your thoughts on this one. This is just part of my whole idea for expanding the game in general. But I think it's probably the most vanilla feeling feature. And having like an illager type that not only spawns witches and ties witches further in with villagers, but also, is an illager in and of itself. It doesn't really spawn in raids, at least not that I think of yet. And it doesn't exist outside of Ancient Cities anyway, so it wouldn't make sense. But it's still a really cool idea to interact with. My eyes are going absolutely blind, so I'm going to go ahead and end this video. And if you like, subscribe, I guess, and bye.